Lisa, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. It's great to meet you.
It is fantastic to meet you after following you for so many years.
Yes, I've, seen your name all over the place over the years. And so I'm glad that we've finally been able to do this. Just to check in with each other about whether or not femininity has ruined the culture. This is like, obviously there was this article, The Great Feminization, that I would say went viral recently. Everyone's been talking about it. It was written by a woman, actually, Helen Andrews. But I've heard this kind of argument from men quite a bit in recent years. I think Jordan Peterson has made similar arguments. I've heard, various other sort of heterodox or conservative men blame either femininity, the feminine, for wokeness, for cancel culture, or really blame women outright. I'm sure, like me, you've heard the refrain from men over and over and over again who said that, for example, transgenderism, trans activism, this whole gender identity ideology thing that took over the culture over the past 10 years is the fault of women, and that in fact women deserve it because of their big bad feminism. What was your impression? Let's first start with the article. Do you have a take, an overall take on the article, The Great Feminization? For those who haven't read it, who are listening, I'll link to it in the show notes, obviously. But essentially, it's that, again, wokeness, cancel culture is inherently feminine.
Right. It's catty. It's competitive in the way that women are competitive, where we don't have this external site on which to impose the competitiveness. We're not fighting for the ball, so we fight against each other, which the evolutionary biologists or sexologists would say is intrasexual competition. It's practicing for edging another woman out to attract a man. And the idea that wokeness is the fault of women because women have become disproportionately represented in these various fields in academia and these institutions, therefore they brought their feminine way of competing with them, which was unsustainable and knocked out this better approach, this masculine approach. My take is, it's possible, but what I find odd is all of these sort of scientifically minded fellas who will insist that we separate correlation from causation all the time. Like, yes, these things happen concurrently, but did one cause the other? That they just, all that is swept aside immediately when we introduce sex differences, the innateness of sex differences. And suddenly, okay, these things happened at the same time, so therefore it is because of women. It is because of our inherent femininity, and it's incompatible with the leadership required to steward these institutions. I just want to ask, what are all the other things going on? And especially right now when we've had this kind of enormous pushback on the overreach of the left, with even more overreach of the right. And Trump is just as censorious and goes after his enemies and shuns and shames people. I don't see social exclusion as being only in the toolbox of women. So I see men acting the same way. So I'm skeptical.
I think that the response would be, the response would be, in terms of leftist men in particular, that these guys have glommed onto wokeness and are participating in cancel culture and, are defending gender identity ideology and all these sort of, over empathetic approaches to politics, culture, policy because they're trying to bed women. I really don't like these arguments. I think that the idea that wokeness and cancel culture are sort of inherently feminine in nature, I think that does make sense in a lot of ways, and we can talk a bit more about that later. But in terms of the reasons why men would support wokeness, yeah, I often hear men in particular saying, men take on these leftist ideologies and they claim to support these ideologies because they think it'll get them access to women. And I kind of think that's BS personally. I don't know if you've heard those arguments before.
No, I don't think I have. I mean, surely some fellas think if I call myself a feminist, more women will. I'm not sure. Is that an attractive quality in a
No.
man? I don't think so.
I mean, it's like the beta cuck thing. I mean, I'm sure there's some women who are into that, but I think for the most part, women who are heterosexual are attracted to masculinity. So I don't really know that I buy into the argument that women are now attracted to femininity in men in particular.
Right. I mean, it might be a way to access more women in these, but honestly, I mean, men have it better than, I mean, if you're looking to be around a lot of women, I guess you just need to go to college because they're overwhelmingly female. So you will have just a tremendous selection to choose from of women because the men are in the minority. So
well, unless you're right wing. And actually, you know what? Now that I'm speaking out loud, I'm going to contradict myself because I have talked to young men who are in college and university and who say that it's actually been very hard for them to date because there's such a differential in terms of politics. So while a lot of younger men, and we saw this during the election, a lot of men did move right, as it were, to support Trump. For example, men are sort of more commonly the based, the red pilled ones, and the women are more commonly the progressives and the woke. So I think it's actually quite difficult for a lot of these young men to date women because they won't accept a man who voted for Trump because to them they equate that with being a misogynist, a racist, whatever else, transphobic.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame in general that young people have been taught that. And I was taught that too. I mean, I was taught that Republicans were bad people. So I'm not even sure I knew a Republican growing up because I grew up in college towns. So I just don't, I barely knew anyone with a diversity of opinion. But now I think it's even worse, that you feel like you can't even be in the presence of another person. And I was thinking about the first time I went to a Reason podcast taping with Nick Gillespie.
Okay.
And I'd grown up full lefty, so I never noticed that these spaces were either disproportionately female or just I mean, I don't think of them as feminine, but I had never been in a place where I felt like there weren't a lot of women or that I felt uncomfortable speaking up. And I got in line to make a comment, and there were only 2 women in the line, and then and so many men, also so many very tall men, and I am not tall at all. And I realized, I haven't felt intimidated like this in a very long time. And just by sheer size. And I thought, I never realized that libertarian was so male dominated, libertarianism. And that was, I mean, this has all been very good for me to have been I haven't been expelled from the blue bubble, but it popped along the way through the gender stuff and the race stuff. And I've been exploring the world out there, and I just had not, I hadn't, for all the complaining about the patriarchy, I realized, well, I haven't really been in places where I feel like it's difficult to navigate because I'm a woman. And I remember I waited in line for a long time, and then I finally gave up, just as Nick Gillespie said, can we hear from a woman? And then like the other woman in line got to ask a question. But I don't know. I feel like those guys are going to be considered really hot pretty soon. I feel like there's going to be the like sexy conservative at college. I feel like that's maybe that's what's next.
As the women come around to the fact that conservative men are sexier than left-wing men.
Or that they, or part of what's happening is an interest in traditional, quote unquote, traditional gender roles, no matter how kind of constructed they are. And if people think that the 1950s are traditional families, when actually they're really an anomaly in human history, but nobody really knows that. So, the kind of, maybe that we're going to go back to more young women being interested in getting married and staying home with raising kids. And the leftist vision of the world with no boundaries, there's not even a boundary of you're male and you're female, I think is very difficult on the brain. And that it feels like the way cats like to be in a little box. I think these young people may think, I want a world with boundaries, and I don't care how strict they are. It makes me feel safe. I mean, seems like that's happening.
So I can see the argument around cancel culture, for example, that this is sort of feminine in nature, which is to say, if we think about cancel culture in terms of people using back channels to get people that they don't like fired or ostracized, as opposed to, say, confronting them directly. And I think typically that is a more feminine behavior. I wonder if you see any legitimacy to that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's tattling, right? They tattle on each other rather than getting what I guess what we're saying is boys would do it in a fist fight as opposed to going to get the teacher. I think my overall take was, I mean, that if we are looking at the Trump administration as the supposedly masculine version, which, that article wasn't exactly saying that, but I think part of the appeal of Trump to people is like, daddy's here and he's going to take care of it. Even though I don't think he's taking care of much at all other than maybe the gender stuff. I think that they're all acting like preschoolers or elementary school kids, whether it's fist fights, whether it's I'm going after my enemies and I'm using the entire US justice system to do it, or it's I am socially excluding you for using one wrong word and therefore you cannot, teach at Harvard anymore. All of you are acting like children. And none of you are actually in a position to be a good leader. And whether it's a masculine expression of your immaturity and inability to lead or a feminine one, it's all exhausting. And none of it is reassuring or helping us get to a version of the world in which we can disagree and be interested in one another's arguments and not be fighting all the time, whether it's overt or behind the scenes covert. But I find them equally immature.
Yeah, I mean, I've always found the argument that women are more emotional than men amusing because it's not true. And we see all these guys, heterodox guys on the right, beefing in very emotional ways, very publicly online all the time. But even privately, I mean, if you've ever been in a relationship with men, you know that they're definitely very emotional. They just sort of deal with it in, I actually think men are quite a bit more passive aggressive than women are, particularly in, relationships, because they will just kind of shut down. And this, it's so funny because women are accused of this all the time. Maybe it's just because I'm so masculine, but like I'm also, like I'm not dating feminine men, so I
Yeah.
don't really know what to make of these arguments. But I find that men will, they'll shut down, they'll storm off, they'll give the silent treatment, and you ask them if anything's wrong, and they're like, no, everything's fine, like forget about it. And I'm like, just tell me what's going on. No, nothing's wrong, everything's fine. Like that's like a male behavior from my perspective, but that's not how, this is typically what women are always accused of doing.
Have you ever heard the term alexithymia?
No.
It means something like an inability to decode your emotions, and it's more common among men than women, but women may have that too, and I'm sure it's more common among you know autistic people, and I'm I think my husband and one of my children have it pretty severely, but yeah, I think they probably can recognize anger, but then they have trouble with the granularity of different emotions. And we could say that that's innate, or we've evolved to be that way. We could also say that women are often encouraged to talk about their feelings, and because of the emphasis on being a nice person, that we become attuned to emotions in ways that men aren't. I mean, just, there's nothing scientific at all about my experience raising children in New York City, but I remember, because I had this one very, very masculine daughter and this one very, very feminine daughter who have both, I would say, both come to the center more, although one more centered than the other. One is still very feminine. But I would watch because my older daughter only played with boys until she only hung out with them boys until the end of middle school. So I would watch these mothers of boys who, when their sons were assholes, they did not discourage it. I mean, they were winning, or they were taking something, or they were succeeding in some way by being an asshole. And my instinct was to be like, dude, you're being an asshole. but the moms, and of course mostly moms of girls, would never tolerate that. That's a problem if a girl acts that way. And I was just, struck by that. I was raised hippy dippy, super feminist. I just don't think I just hadn't seen that. So it was very instructive to me. And I don't understand the inability for some people to accept that socialization can play a role in how men and women behave. It seems so obvious to me, because these messages about what women are supposed to do based on our sex have changed so many times. They change when we need them to change. I mean, women were told they were not suited to work in a factory, and then all the men go off to war, and suddenly you're not suited to work in a factory because you're good at fine motor skills. Oh, actually, that's great for Rosie the Riveter, So actually, because of your fine motor skills, you should go to work. Like, the messages have changed depending on what we need from women. So I'm resistant to this, the all or nothingness of it. It doesn't have enough nuance for me to be able to embrace it, I guess, at this level.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to embrace because it's so not my experience. But I do see a lot of women behaving in these ways, because I personally am not worried about, I'm not averse to conflict or confrontation, and I'm happy to talk things out about really mostly anything. And I will confront people if I'm angry at them, I'll say something. And at the same time, I've had a lot of female friends in my life who, it's very difficult to speak honestly with them because they take honesty as an offense. And I don't mean I'm insulting them. I mean, when you say something like men aren't women, or, I don't think that it's great that, addicts and criminals are just allowed to like take over entire blocks in Vancouver because, that's the compassionate thing to do. I don't want to be around crazy people who are high on meth and stink, like who are screaming at me on the bus. And yeah, and it's frustrating if you're not like that, to try to, have honest conversations and get along. And, you're obviously often subject to cancellation. And I think in my life, the people in my personal life, in any case, who, canceled me or bailed on me as a friend, as it were, because of my politics, were primarily women. Not all, but were mostly women. So I can see the argument, but I push back. I like you, I sort of feel an inherent resistance to this idea that wokeness and cancel culture are the fault of women and are feminine in nature. This is a womanly kind of thing, because it's just not how I am. And to Helen Andrews' credit, she does say, this is about not just about individuals, but this is about patterns of behavior as a group. We can't account for every single individual's different personality, but there's obviously women who are not very feminine, just like there's men who are not very masculine. But so she writes in the article, and she's referencing other people's arguments here as well. All cancellations are feminine. Cancel culture is simply what women do whenever there are enough of them in a given organization or field. That is the Great Feminization thesis, which, so she's referencing another author here, which the same author later elaborated on upon at book length. Everything you think of as wokeness is simply a epiphenomenon of demographic feminization. And she goes on to say, everything that you think of as wokeness involves prioritizing the feminine over the masculine. So empathy over rationality, safety over risk, cohesion over competition.
I just was thinking about the Charlotte Perkins Gilman novel, Herland. That these early feminists who depicted utopias as places without men. Actually, can't remember what. The only thing I remember about that novel is that I wish I could remember the word, that the bodies evolve so that they can self-impregnate, so they don't even need men to propagate the species. Or like Paradise Island, there are all these depictions of utopia as being places without men, and that women would be so inherently cooperative. But if this is true, then they're not at all cooperative. They're just purging wrong thinkers. But I'm not sure that I'm buying that it's just about being feminine. And it may be part of the problem, that it may be this kind of boy who cried wolf problem. Like, the first time Trump was elected, and the left, or the entire kind of blue side of the country, not even the far left, all of us got deranged. And it's true. I mean, Trump derangement syndrome wasn't a problem, that I was not aware that it had affected me. And we were reacting to everything and needing to reject everything so that we could not make rational decisions about, and we were not responding, we were reacting. Now, people who are alarmed are accused of TDS, except it's warranted now. So we have this problem that now it can dismiss valid concerns about him. I'm wondering if there's something similar with this feminization thing, because there are so many examples of it's women's fault over the course of what little American history I know. And I'm thinking about, for instance, Philip Wiley and momism in the 40s, and that if there was a kind of masculinization crisis then, and that was because of overbearing mothers. And in the Cold War, there was a kind of moral panic around that overbearing mothers would make you gay and or a communist. And that if you allowed yourself as a man to be overly exposed to the feminine, that you would never reach the proper level of masculinity. So is my resistance because I have studied many iterations of that, and I'm therefore thinking, this is just another version of that? Or is this just a very, very convenient argument that feminists ruined everything? And, you know, going back to what you'd said earlier about, for instance, blaming feminists for this trans rights or trans wrongs, that's taken over, you know, that to achieve some of what women, the second wave feminism wanted, maybe some feminists did downplay sex differences because women had to prove, yes, we can have bank accounts and credit cards in our own names without being married, or yes, we can do these jobs that we're legally barred from getting, no, it is not okay to rape us just because we're married to you. There were all of these very basic things that women were fighting for, these basic rights. And maybe some of them said, look, we're not that different in order to be allowed to do those things or convince people. But I'm not sure that there's a direct line between that and all this stuff that has happened. There are so many other mitigating factors.
Right. So, one of the key arguments here is that this whole wokeness phenomenon and this whole cancel culture thing is connected to an influx of women into the workplace. So the workplace became more feminized, ergo the workplace became woke. We imposed DEI policies, so workplaces were forced to hire women, and now all of a sudden we're prioritizing empathy over what's rational. Helen Andrews wrote specifically about academia and the law and the impact of so many more women entering into law and entering into academia and all sorts of other workplaces as well. But so she says you can have an academia that is majority female, but it will be, as majority female departments in today's universities already are, oriented towards goals other than open debate and the unfettered pursuit of the truth. And if your academia doesn't pursue truth, what good is it? And then she says, if your journalists, for example, aren't prickly individualists who don't mind alienating people, what good are they? If a business loses its swashbuckling spirit and becomes feminized, inward-focused bureaucracy, will it not stagnate? And she also says if the legal profession becomes majority female, which it's not yet, I think it's like 33% female or something like that in the US. She says if the legal profession becomes majority female, I expect to see the ethos of Title IX tribunals and the Kavanaugh hearings spread. Judges will bend the rules for favored groups and enforce them rigorously on disfavored groups, as already occurs to a worrying extent. It was possible to believe back in 1970 that introducing women into the legal profession in large numbers would only have a minor effect. That belief is no longer sustainable. The changes will be massive.
Well, maybe the problem is less about women than about kind of quotas, or feeling that in the same way, it was a bad idea to have separate criteria for women in the armed forces, or to be a firefighter or any of that stuff. Like, if you need brawn to do the job, then that's what you need. And a few women will be able to do that. But if you can't, there are things, we don't want you there because you're a woman. We want you there because you have the capacity to do it. Like anything else, I don't care about the identities of the people, making the airplanes. I just want them to do a good job so it stays together when I'm in the air. So it depends on, and I know she talks about that this is the project of social engineering. It's not, we had a massive push for the leaky pipeline and making sure women didn't drop out of STEM and that people got artificially promoted. So that seems to be more the problem. And then it's not just women, it's all kinds of people who are promoted because they check certain boxes. It's really the Kimberly Crenshaw's intersectionality that I think, I was a little too old for that. I graduated from college in 93. So I kind of missed third wave feminism. It happened after we were still on the second wave. We had women's studies, we had some co-ed bathrooms and we had some women's, but it was a crazy hippie school. But so that had really, I knew nothing about that until I started investigating the trans stuff. And look, that's an interesting idea too, that, it's not just that you're a woman, it's your class and your race and all of these other things that affect your position in society, but also we're more than that. I was actually just thinking, this will make some sense, I guess, just going with that thought. So I was just on a high school tour, because in New York City, you have to get into a high school, a public high school. And I was walking with a friend and her kid, and the kid said something about, you need to have resources to be able to study for these tests to get into these selective high schools. And so there's an unfair advantage. And I said, but the most selective high school in the city is predominantly Asian. And, many of these kids are first generation and they don't have money. What they have is a culture of like very high expectations and a certain kind of parenting and family structure that prioritizes success. That our demographic of progressive liberals and our everybody fail together style of education don't. We're thinking about happiness or comfort, or we're not preparing our children to work hard. We want them to be happy, which is not actually that should be secondary. The first thing should be, can you manage yourself as a human being on the planet? which I know very little about, so it's not that easy for me to impart that to my children.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of winging it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, no one said that. I didn't have any parenting either, but I just think that's all related. That this has been the ethos, that focusing on identity and thinking that people need or deserve certain things because of that, rather than can you work hard and are you qualified. So maybe that's my whole point. So many other things have gone on at the same time. Yes, women took over a lot of the things or became disproportionately represented, and that had some effect. And so many other things happened. And if you look at John Haidt's work talking about what happened in the universities where this all percolated, it's also tied to social media. It's tied to technological changes. There's more happening than just women. It's a generation trained to think in a certain way. Maybe, or maybe it's all just maybe just chicks ruined it.
Maybe women really did ruin the world, and we should send them back to the kitchen barefoot and pregnant.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things I find funny about her essay is at the end of it, Helen Andrews says, but I'm not that kind of woman. And therefore, I would not do well in one of, I should not stay home with my kids or be a traditional wife, because essentially, there are male brains and female brains, and she has a male brain. So she's basically saying she has as I emailed you, she has a man's brain in a woman's body. I'm like, all right. So we have
I feel like that in a way somehow, but I just, again, I don't really, but I've always sort of leaned masculine in terms of my personality and the way that I am. And even in terms of my friends, I've always had a lot of male friends. I feel comfortable around men often more than I feel comfortable around women, because I sort of feel like I can be myself a little bit more, burping and swearing and saying offensive things, for example.
Oh, yeah.
In that way.
Well, I'm always I'm just the misbehaving woman. I mean, I'm slightly more things than people. I'm certainly more oriented to things than my husband is. And I'm in a marriage with not particularly traditional gender roles. I mean, he cooks and I get in fights with the other men, which I'm not proud of. I wish I didn't, but I do. I'm I don't think I'd make a good man, but I don't think I make a good woman either.
Me neither. That's funny that you say that. I'm like, yeah, that's also how I feel.
Yeah.
I think, I've heard a lot of men make the argument to me over the years that, now, look at you stupid women, you all have to fight for women's spaces, but this serves you right because you took men's spaces. You took over men's spaces, you entered into men's spaces, but also you won't let men have man-only spaces. Ergo, this is your karma. Suck it.
Well, it depends, because some of those shouldn't have been man-only spaces, right? I mean, some of those, Wall Street or, well, being doctors and lawyers, right? There's no reason that qualified women should not have been able to do that. Those were artificially skewed toward men. And maybe there was then we need to open them to women, which Helen Andrews would say was social engineering or artificial, but it's not like they were naturally for men. I mean, I guess she's arguing that that they evolved that way, but also women didn't have a say. So maybe they do need their spaces back. But what are the spaces that men are not allowed to have that what do they want back?
That's what I'm always wondering. I was always, when men first started making those arguments to me, I was always quite confused because I was like, which men's spaces are you talking about? What are these men's spaces? And eventually it started to come out as some men began to respond to me that it was the workplace, universities, and sometimes they'll offer up men's change rooms or in bathrooms. And I'm like, women are not clamoring to get into men's change rooms and bathrooms, first of all. But second of all, that's, among the worst of these arguments, because the reasons that women don't want men in their change rooms and washrooms is not just for privacy's sake, although that certainly matters, and it matters for boys and men too, sure. But primarily it's because of danger, and because they don't want predatory men committing sex crimes in the washroom, which would be exactly why a man would be in the woman's washroom. Like a woman's not going into the men's washroom to commit a sex crime. She's going into the men's washroom because the line for the women's washroom at the sports event or at the club is hours long, and she doesn't want to, pee her pants.
Yeah, I am often the woman just barreling into the men's room, trying not to pee on myself. But
I mean, there's some, it's like, the workplace complaint, I think, gets to me because, and this aspect was referenced by Helen Andrews in the article, and she talked about it also on Megan Down's podcast. Yeah. And she talks about how, some male-dominated workplaces suddenly had to get rid of pinups, like pinup posters. To me, I'll just call it pornography. Yeah, at the workplace, because women started entering these workplaces, and then it was considered sexual harassment. And it's like, of course, there shouldn't be pornography in the workplace. Like you're talking about, lockers on construction sites and in the, firefighters, policemen, like those kinds of contexts. I've heard about this often, where women entering into these workplaces felt really uncomfortable because there would be porn in the workplace. And, it's not professional, but it's also totally unnecessary. Like I don't know what the defense would be for having so-called pinups or, like your ripped out page from the Playboy, I guess would have been in the 80s, right? In the workplace. I don't know what that takes away from exactly. Like that should be sort of a private habit if you're going to have it.
Although I guess that was bonding. I mean, I guess that's what they missed. Like that was some kind of language they all spoke. But I was trying to think, like, what is the, should a woman suck it up and not be bothered by it? That would be a great skill. Should if she goes to HR to complain, then yeah, I guess that's tattling. Should women have gotten purchased Playgirl and ripped out the centerfold and put that up, and would the men really wouldn't like it?
No, I don't think they'd like it because they'd think it was gay, like they were being exposed to gay stuff, right? Yeah. They would have to look at another man's naked body.
But that
sexy naked body.
I wonder if anybody did that, because I feel like that would be so awesome. I mean, that's like pornography with pornography. I don't know. I feel like I wish I were more male typical in some ways, because I am very prone to conflict and disagreeable, but I'm also like, I definitely am not rational. I mean, what the fuck? Men are what rational men do I know?
I don't think that men are more rational than women. I think that's a totally bunk argument.
Rational men. And I think a lot of men are very pissy and they think they're being rational, or they're just pointing out their studies, but I sense the emotion boiling underneath. I mean, just because you only have 3 emotions doesn't mean you're rational.
No, I think it makes you more irrational because you're not really able to express in a coherent way what you're thinking or feeling, or why you're feeling frustrated or mad, or why you're being so stubborn in your arguments, or whatever it is, right? Why you're shutting down when challenged, and you can't have, like a conversation about your emotions, which would be something a woman would want to do. I will admit to, I really love having conversations about emotions. I could do that for
I do
hours and hours on end.
all day
No
long.
problem. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. I am very interested in why people do what they do and how they make sense of things. And I mean, I if I wasn't so disagreeable, I would like to be a therapist, but I feel like I would just bark at people and just be like, "What the fuck? Stop doing that." But
Yeah, I
I
would be too judgmental. I think I'm too judgy.
I'm too also just too short-tempered. Yeah, I am definitely missing a whole bunch, a whole array of emotions that are considered um, feminine. But luckily, I have my husband for some of those. But I'm thinking about Sandra Bem, the psychologist from the 70s, who was studying masculinity and femininity, and she was part of that kind of 1970s movement that was very interested in opening up masculinity to women and girls, and part of that tomboyism is good, and part of that second wave feminism. But an interesting thing, aside from the record Free to Be You and Me, which had songs about boys who wanted dolls, and that it was okay for boys to have these feminine attributes. For the most part, the 70s was about decrying femininity for everybody. So even though Sandra Bem was studying all of that, she dissuaded her own daughter from, for instance, studying ballet. She did not want her own daughter to do anything traditionally feminine. And I think at some point some people started to realize that there's a problem in marking too many human traits as masculine or feminine, because we all need to have some combination of them. And
Mm.
at one point, I don't know if it was Bem, but somebody studying sex roles had decided that we should call these traits something like instrumental and expressive, something like that. So there's assertiveness, and there's independence, and there's being communicative, um, and compassionate, but that you wouldn't want any of these things without a touch of the other. And if these institutions are failing because there's too much tattling and people being too offended instead of interested and able to, that saying no, how dare you, instead of interesting argument, um, let me push back on that. Now, I sometimes I can't do that. Sometimes, you and I are on this listserv of sexologists, and sometimes I just get so annoyed that I can't say, interesting argument, let me push back on that. And in fact, when I do, I get the same reaction, which is kind of like, shut up with your dumb feminism, but put in a more respectful way than that. But I would like to respond that way. I would like to be able to consider it and not have to reject everything because it interrupts my argument, and allow my argument to evolve. This is the model of how I want to be. And I would say that I achieve that 18% of the time, which is better than the 0% I was when I was full left, had no idea that my side was wrong about anything.
Totally.
But that is the problem. Men being like that, women being like that, I don't care. The problem is being offended instead of being able to engage with ideas. And I think men who are like that, or men who are have a narrow range of emotions and are more cerebral because they're more on the toward the kind of autistic brain, they probably think they should all be in charge and it would be better. But I'm not sure that's true either. I don't want I feel like part of what happened with social media was that you had this kind of libertarian, heavily autistic kind of people developing this technology, and it went that way even without women are totally underrepresented in tech, and tech is what facilitated this change and what facilitated wokeness. So how can we separate those things? I'd be much more interested in understanding how those went together and the very sort of strange cloud that created that we all live under now. That's way more interesting than women ruined everything.
Do you think that the workplace has benefited from this influx of women in any particular ways?
Well, I was asking my husband today because he works at it's a kind of educational publishing company, some reading software and stuff like that. I said, how many straight men do you work with? And he said, oh, I don't even, just, there aren't really any men. There are maybe 2 men and dozens of women. I mean, 2 other men. And I said, does that bother you? Do you wish you were? I know he's not. He likes to watch sports. He's not like he's a regular dude, but it's just a sample of one. But it did not bother him at all. He didn't feel like he was missing anything by not being in a more male-dominated workplace. And then I thought about, I haven't had a ton of full-time jobs because I'm not suited to corporate environments because you have to behave yourself. I only really had one full-time job, and it was at a kids' TV show, and it was totally run by women. They were all, my problem with them, I didn't realize how good I had it, but I remember they would say things like, I love your shirt. Did you get that at Banana? And I was just like, I can't do this. I can't talk to you. You're my boss, and I can't talk to you because you asked me if I got this at Banana. And no, you don't pay me enough for me to get it at Banana. But anyway. I don't know. I think I don't have very much personal experience in regular work environments. And this isn't really answering your question, but I don't know. Have you had regular jobs that were in highly feminine environments that you feel like are stifled because of that representation?
All of my regular jobs were very woman-y jobs. Like, well, no, not all of them, but like, when I was working full time in an office before I went back to school, so that was like most of my 20s, I was always doing reception. So I was always in like these admin positions, which are always female dominated. So I don't know that I have anything really to compare it to. I've had a million other little part-time jobs in other places beyond that, because then when I was in university, I would always have like 3 different jobs. I'd do like research assistant jobs, and I would work at the liquor store, and I worked in a video store when we used to have those, and I worked in a cafe restaurant thing, but I've never worked in a particularly male-dominated environment, so I don't think that I can compare. I will say again that I prefer male culture to female culture, whatever that means. I
What sort of tell me more. I'm curious what that looks like for you.
Like I've spent a lot of my life going out to bars with men and being out in bars with a bunch of men and not very many women, because the women, for whatever reason, don't enjoy bar culture as much as men do, or whatever. And because when I was younger, I still am. When I was younger, I was really into hip hop, and none of my female friends wanted to go to rap shows. And so I would go to rap shows with men, and like 85% of the people at the hip hop show would be men. And I think, yeah, I think I feel a bit more comfortable in more like brash, like almost aggressive environments where I don't feel like I have to be polite. I don't like being phony, as you can imagine. I'm sure you don't either. Like, I
No,
don't like being phony. I don't want to have to be polite. I don't want to have to watch what I say at all, ever. And when I'm around men, I don't feel like I have to do those things. And sometimes when I'm around women, I feel pressured to do those things. I'm not saying that I do them, but I probably do on some level, much maybe less so than I did when I was younger, but I probably do watch myself more in terms of what I say when I'm around women, especially if they're women and I don't know exactly what they think about various things, and I don't necessarily want to anger or offend somebody right off the bat. So yeah, I think that's part of what I mean. I do, like I like saying offensive things, and I like that men will make offensive jokes and that we can kind of be mean to each other and we don't take it seriously. That's part of it too. You can sort of pick on each other and you bully each other in a way that's sort of brotherly almost, I'd say.
Do you have brothers?
No, I have a sister.
It's funny you said that because in her interview with Megan Down, Helen Andrews said one thing she doesn't understand is teasing, and I have that too. Because when people tease me, my reaction is, you've actually brought up an actual flaw of mine. So do you have is there something we need to talk about?
You get offended. I don't really get offended by those things so much, because I usually, if one of my male friends like is teasing me and brings up some character trait that I have, I'll be like, that's probably fair at some level. And you're like, okay, fair enough.
I mean, I wish I had more training to, I don't think you should be completely immune or indifferent to your effect on people. I mean, I'm not, in a lot of ways, I'm incredibly insensitive to, I mean, very sensitive when it comes to have you hurt me, but not very sensitive when it comes to have I hurt you. But yeah, I don't do a lot of like taking the temperature of the room before I just announce I speak my mind on the subway. But I do think when I was researching my book on tomboys, I talked to these women who basically spent their childhoods socialized with boys, not as boys, but with boys, and a lot of them went into male dominated fields. Now, maybe one would say, oh, maybe they had testosterone exposure in the womb, so they were prone to be more male typical, and then went on into male dominated jobs. But yes, I doubt that. What they often talked about was, I'm very used to being around men. It doesn't, I'm comfortable there and I'm not intimidated. And I thought, I wish I had that. Then again, I didn't know how to be around women and girls either, because I just was lost until last week. Now I've got my shit together. No, I mean, it would be, again, I just keep going back to, there's so much that goes on with male typical socialization that I think is really great, like playing in a large group. If you're playing sports, and again, focusing your competitiveness on the ball. I mean, when I look at the teenage girls competing with each other, it really grosses me out. And I think, I wish you guys were chasing after a ball, because it's all the same thing. It's the same competitiveness, but you're trying to edge one another out. I guess that's what they're maybe referring to, is that writ large ruining all the institutions. But you know what? That's why it's important for girls to play sports, because then they start to learn those skills, and they also learn how to recover quickly. Like, you fuck it up and you drop the ball and the entire team lost. I can barely watch my kids play sports because I did not play sports, so I had no training in this. But losing is this incredible kind of preparation for life, because you got to get over it and you got to move on. Yeah. You know, if you mess up, there's another play. You just got to keep going. So let's try a more equitable society, and then let's see. But let's see if Helen Andrews' theory shakes out. But we haven't really tried it yet. I mean, I'm not sure that where we're going right now. You know, I'm not sure that.
If it turns out that AI ruins the world, we'll know who to blame.
Right. It won't be the women. It won't be the women.
The women didn't invent those AI humanoid robots that are going to kill us all.
It's the tech bros. And when it comes down to it, though, when it's the tech bros versus the Be Kind Brigade, the Be Kind Brigade will not last. They will be smushed by the tech bro billionaires, killer robots.
True. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for talking with me.
Oh, it was such an honor to be invited, and so fun. Like, I woke up. I perked right up.
You seem super perky. I'm very impressed for somebody who woke up at 4:30 a.m. Very impressed. I would be like 100% falling asleep on the camera.
I was like that until, we got to thinking about tech bro killer robots.
Which all worked up.
Now my brain's all activated. So thank you.
Thanks again for your time. Can you tell people where they can find your work and find you online and all those things?
Yes, mainly these days at my Substack, which is broadview.news.
Okay. Perfecto. Have a great night. I hope you get a great sleep. I hope that you allow yourself to sleep in a little later than 4:30.
I will try so hard. Thank you.
Okay, great. Take care. Good night.
Good night.